There is a multi-billion-dollar industry built entirely on the assumption that you cannot trust your own nose. Walk down any store aisle today, and you will find shelf after shelf of synthetic fragrances. Plug-in diffusers, aerosol sprays, candles poured from petroleum-derived paraffin, scented with compounds that exist nowhere in nature. The labels say clean linen and ocean breeze and lavender fields. The ingredients say something else entirely. Phthalates, synthetic musks, volatile organic compounds that the EPA has linked, in repeated studies, to indoor air quality problems in the very homes people are trying to make smell pleasant. Here is what that industry does not want you to think about. The most sophisticated fragrance delivery system ever engineered was not invented in a laboratory. It was not patented by a corporation. It has been sitting on windowsills, in temple courtyards, in palace gardens, and in the hands of healers for longer than recorded history. It is alive. It is a plant. And the fragrance it produces is not an imitation of anything. It is the original. Today we are counting down 13 indoor plants with documented, powerful, historically significant fragrance plants that ancient civilizations treasured not just for how they smelled, but for what that smell did to the body and the mind. We are going to ground each one in its scriptural or ancient text record, trace it across multiple civilizations, and then look at what modern research is beginning to understand about why these fragrances actually matter for human health. Stay with me through number 7. I want to tell you about a moment in the ancient world, a near-death collapse in the desert. 3 days without food or water, where one plant on this list was credited not just with pleasant fragrance, but with physical restoration. The researchers studying this plant's active compounds now have a hypothesis about why that story is physiologically plausible. And pay close attention to number 1. Most people who own this plant have no idea they are sitting next to one of the most historically documented therapeutic fragrances in the world. Number 13. Lemon balm. Most people who encounter lemon balm treat it as a minor herb garden filler. A pleasant enough plant, easy to grow, decent in tea. They brush past the real story entirely. Lemon balm Melissa officinalis appears in the writings of the medieval Islamic physician Avicenna, whose canon of medicine was the standard reference text in European and Islamic medical education for 5 centuries. Avicenna described Melissa as a plant that causeth the heart and mind to become merry, and recommended it specifically for melancholy, anxiety, and disturbed sleep. He was not speaking loosely. He was documenting clinical observations made across decades of practice. The name itself carries the history. Melissa is the Greek word for honeybee. The plant was named for bees because beekeepers in ancient Greece rubbed lemon balm on the inside of empty hives to attract new swarms. Pliny the Elder recorded this practice in his Natural History in the 1st century. The Benedictine monks of the Middle Ages distilled lemon balm into Carmelite water, a remedy sold across Europe for centuries as a treatment for nervous disorders and headache. What these practitioners were observing empirically, modern research is beginning to map biochemically. Lemon balm contains compounds called rosmarinic acid and a group of terpenes, including citronellol, linalool, and geraniol, that appear to interact with GABA receptors in the brain, the same receptors targeted by certain anti-anxiety medications. Studies, including a randomized controlled trial published in Nutrients in 2014, found that participants who consumed a standardized lemon balm extract reported measurable reductions in anxiety and insomnia scores compared to placebo. With results researchers considered statistically significant and worth continued investigation. Here is something almost no one knows about lemon balm fragrance, specifically the volatile compounds responsible for its characteristic lemon scent. The citronellol and geraniol are most concentrated not in the flowers, but in the very young leaves at the growing tips of the plant. The older leaves release a milder, more diffuse version of the same scent. If you want the full aromatic impact, you brush the newest growth. This is why professional herbalists harvest only the top few inches of the plant, a preparation detail that has been passed down in European herbal traditions for centuries, but is entirely absent from most modern growing guides. Keep a pot of lemon balm on a desk or beside a reading chair. Brush the newest leaves, not the older ones, when you sit down to work. The citrus release is immediate, clean, and measurably different from the older foliage's more muted version. Use the harvested leaves in a simple, cold, steep handful of fresh lemon balm tips in cold water for 6 to 8 hours in the refrigerator. The cold extraction preserves more of the volatile aromatic compounds than hot water does, producing a drink that smells almost exactly like the living plant. The ancient healers who named this plant after the honeybee understood something the synthetic fragrance industry is still catching up to. Some of the most powerful things a scent can do for a human being cannot be poured from a bottle. Number 12. Mint. Mint is so common, so available, so ordinary seeming that its history reads like a corrective to our assumptions about what an important plant looks like. The Talmud, the central text of rabbinic Jewish law and tradition, records that mint was used as a tithe offering in ancient Israel. The tithe was a formal 1/10 offering of agricultural produce given to the temple. That mint appears on this list, alongside grain and cumin, tells you something about how seriously it was valued. In Matthew 23:23, the same tithe practice is referenced, you tithe mint and dill and cumin, in a context that confirms how deeply embedded aromatic herbs were in the temple economy of ancient Judea. Greek physicians used mint as a digestive carminative and a treatment for nausea. Roman soldiers were instructed to rub mint on their arms before battle, a practice Pliny documented in a belief that mint's stimulating fragrance increased mental alertness and reduced fatigue. The Egyptians cultivated peppermint extensively. Dried mint has been found in Egyptian tombs dating to approximately 1000 BCE. The aromatic compound responsible for mint's characteristic cooling sensation is menthol. And menthol does something physiologically unusual. It binds to cold-sensing receptors in the skin and mucous membranes, producing a sensation of cooling without any actual temperature change. This is not a trick of perception. It is a direct interaction with specific receptor proteins, TRPM8 receptors that the body uses to detect cold. Research, published in multiple peer-reviewed journals, has shown that inhalation of menthol vapor produces measurable changes in perceived airflow and cognitive alertness, with results consistent enough to sustain continued investigation. There is a preparation detail that distinguishes the experienced mint grower from everyone else. The menthol content of mint leaves is highest just before the plant begins to flower. Once a mint plant starts pushing flower buds, it begins redirecting energy towards seed production, and the aromatic oil concentration in the leaves drops measurably. The traditional practice of pinching off flower buds the moment they appear, which every serious herbalist and most serious cooks know, is not just about keeping the plant productive. It is about preserving the concentration of the compound that makes mint smell and taste like mint. Keep several varieties side by side on a kitchen windowsill. Spearmint, peppermint, chocolate mint. Each has a distinct aromatic profile, because each produces a different ratio of the same core terpene compounds. The act of brushing them as you move through the kitchen and accidental daily contact produces a fragrance reset for the room that no air freshener has ever come close to replicating. The Roman soldiers who rubbed mint on their arms before battle were not being superstitious. They were using a well-documented stimulus. The research is now beginning to examine the mechanism. Number 11. Rosemary. In the ancient world, rosemary was present at both ends of human life. It was placed in the hands of the dead at funeral rites across the Mediterranean. It was woven into wedding garlands in Greece and Rome as a symbol of fidelity and remembrance. Shakespeare's Ophelia famously says, "There's rosemary." That's for remembrance, and while Shakespeare wrote in the 1600s, he was drawing on a cultural association that stretched back at least 2,000 years. The Hebrew scriptures do not name rosemary explicitly, but aromatic herbs used in temple incense rituals almost certainly included rosemary by the Greco-Roman period, when Jewish and Mediterranean plant cultures had substantial overlap. What is documented beyond dispute is rosemary's prominence in both Greek and Roman medical writing. Dioscorides, the first-century Greek physician whose De Materia Medica was the foundational pharmacological text of the ancient world, recorded rosemary as a warming, stimulating herb beneficial for the liver and for weakness of the nervous system. Modern phytochemistry has found specific compounds to examine in those traditional claims. Rosemary contains rosmarinic acid, a potent antioxidant along with carnosic acid, camphor, and 1,8 cineole, the latter of which is also a primary constituent of eucalyptus oil. The 1,8 cineole in rosemary has been the subject of genuine scientific interest. A study published in Therapeutic Advances in Psychopharmacology found associations between concentration of 1,8 cineole in the blood and performance on cognitive speed and accuracy tests, with researchers characterizing the results as preliminary but warranting further investigation. Here is the preparation nuance most people miss entirely. Rosemary's aromatic compounds are volatile oils that begin degrading the moment the plant is cut. Commercially dried rosemary has lost the majority of these volatile constituents by the time it reaches a kitchen shelf. For aromatic purposes, not culinary ones, the living plant is the only form that delivers the full spectrum. A rosemary plant kept in a sunny window does not just smell pleasant when you brush it. It is continuously releasing those volatile compounds into the air of the room at a low, steady level throughout the day. For the most concentrated aromatic release, run your fingers firmly along a sprig, rather than simply touching it. This breaks the tiny oil glands on the leaf surface, called trichomes, and releases a burst of aromatic compounds that dissipates within minutes, but can fill a room instantly. Ancient temple fumigation, with rosemary branches, relied on exactly this mechanism: heat and physical disruption of the leaf surface, releasing aromatic compounds rapidly into the air. The civilizations that put rosemary in the hands of the dead were preserving one of humanity's most persistent aromatic traditions. Modern research is now beginning to give biochemical shape to what they were observing. Number 10. Lavender. In 1992, archaeologists excavating a Bronze Age site in Cyprus unearthed what has been described as the oldest perfumery ever found, a facility dating to approximately 2000 BCE, containing stills, mixing bowls, and residue analysis identifying several plant-based fragrance compounds, among them lavender, extracted and concentrated for use in perfumed oils. That is 4,000 years of documented human use of this fragrance. And the question that rarely gets asked is why? Why did every major ancient civilization independently arrive at lavender? The Egyptians used lavender oil in the mummification process. The Romans added lavender to their bathwater. The word lavender likely derives from the Latin lavare, to wash. The ancient Greeks called it nardus, named for the Syrian city of Naarda, where it was traded. And it appears in the New Testament in this form: the woman who anoints Jesus with spikenard in Mark 14 is using an expensive perfume with a lavender family plant as a likely component. A detail that conveys the extraordinary value attached to this fragrance in the ancient Near East. The primary aromatic compounds in lavender, linalool, and linalool acetate have been the subject of genuine scientific inquiry. Multiple randomized controlled trials have examined lavender aromatherapy's effects on anxiety, sleep quality, and pain perception, with a sufficient body of results for researchers to sustain continued investigation. A 2012 review in Evidence-Based Complementary and Alternative Medicine examined the literature and found results across multiple trials that researchers considered meaningful, though they also noted methodological limitations in many studies that warrants caution in interpretation. The preparation detail that most indoor lavender growers never learn: lavender needs to be cut back hard each spring by about 1/3 to prevent it from becoming a woody, sparse flowering plant within a few seasons. A lavender plant that has never been pruned will stop producing the dense flower spikes that carry the highest concentration of aromatic oils within 2 or 3 years. The ancient lavender cultivators who supplied the Roman bathhouses maintained their fields with regular cutting. The same principle applies at the scale of a pot on a windowsill. Dry the cut flower spikes upside down in a warm, dark, well-ventilated space, not in direct sunlight, which degrades the volatile oils. Properly dried lavender, stored away from light and heat, will release its characteristic fragrance for 12 to 18 months. Sachets tucked into linen drawers and closets are not a decorative affectation. They are a 4,000-year-old storage and protection practice that happen to smell extraordinary. Number 9. Scented geranium. In the 19th century, French perfumers were paying extraordinary prices for Bulgarian rose oil, the aromatic extract from Rosa damascena, used as the foundation of countless high-end perfumes. Then someone discovered Pelargonium graveolens, the rose-scented geranium. The fragrance was so close, so convincingly rosy, that the French perfume industry immediately adopted it as a rose oil extender and substitute. Within a few decades, scented geranium oil, particularly from plants grown in Algeria and Réunion, had become a staple of European perfumery, used in products from soap to fine fragrance, where it still appears today on ingredient labels as geranium oil without further explanation. But rose is only one of the 20-plus fragrance profiles available in the scented geranium family. Lemon geranium, peppermint geranium, apple geranium, nutmeg geranium, chocolate geranium, cinnamon geranium, coconut geranium. Each is a distinct species, or cultivar, each producing a different aromatic compound profile in the glands that stud the leaf surface. The fragrance in scented geraniums is entirely in the foliage. The flowers are present but largely irrelevant to the aromatic profile. This makes scented geraniums interactive fragrance plants. The scent is released on contact, not passively diffused into the air. What almost no one knows, the rose geranium's primary fragrance compound, geraniol, is also a demonstrated insect deterrent. Studies examining geraniol's repellent effect on mosquitoes and certain agricultural pests have found results consistent enough for researchers to characterize it as a legitimate area of continued investigation. The ancient practice of planting aromatic herbs near doorways and windows documented across Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, and Asian cultures may have served a dual purpose that modern research is only now mapping biochemically. Collect 3 or 4 varieties on a single windowsill. Rose, lemon, peppermint, and nutmeg will give you an essentially complete fragrance counter within the span of 18 inches of shelf space. When guests brush past them, the effect is immediate and consistently surprising. No one who encounters a well-placed scented geranium collection expects what they smell. Number 8. Star jasmine. The jasmine trade of the ancient world is not a minor footnote. It is a major economic history. Aromatic plants jasmine, among them were among the primary commodities of the ancient spice routes connecting the Arabian Peninsula, Persia, India, and the Mediterranean. The Song of Solomon, written approximately 900 BCE, references fragrant plants in ways that reflect both their sensory power and their cultural prestige. While the king was at his couch, my nard gave its fragrance. The nard referenced there is likely spikenard, a close botanical relative of jasmine family plants. The passage reflects what the fragrance trade documents in the ancient Near East. Extraordinary fragrance was associated with royalty, divine presence, and the highest moments of human life. Star jasmine trachelospermum. Jasminoides is not true jasmine botanically, but it produces a remarkably similar aromatic profile, rich, sweet, honeyed, with a warmth that distinguishes it from lighter, citrus-forward fragrances. It is a vining plant, entrained on a small indoor trellis near a bright window. A mature plant in full bloom produces flower clusters over a period of weeks rather than days, with new buds continuing to open as earlier ones fade. The primary aromatic compounds in jasmine-type fragrances include benzyl acetate, linalool, and indole, a compound that at high concentrations smells unpleasant, but at the trace levels present in jasmine bloom is part of what gives the fragrance its characteristic depth and complexity. Indole is the same compound present in orange blossom and gardenia. It is, essentially, the difference between a simple sweet floral and a fragrance with real complexity. Perfumers have known about indole's role in jasmine fragrance for over a century. Most casual growers have never heard of it. Star jasmine is more forgiving indoors than true Arabian jasmine, more tolerant of inconsistent watering, more adaptable to a range of light conditions once established. This makes it an excellent entry point for anyone who wants the jasmine fragrance family without the demanding maintenance of the original species. Train it around a window frame. Give it something to climb. The reward is a recurring bloom cycle that transforms an ordinary room into something a perfumer would recognize immediately. Number 7. Hoya. Most people who own a Hoya bought it for the leaves, the thick, waxy, almost artificial-looking foliage makes Hoya a reliable and attractive houseplant. And most growers are entirely content with it as a foliage plant. They never experience what happens when it blooms. But here is what the Hoya's history actually looks like. In traditional Ayurvedic medicine, the ancient Indian system of plant-based medicine documented in Sanskrit texts, including the Charaka, Samhita, and the Ashtanga Hridayam plants from the Hoya family, were used in treatments for respiratory conditions and skin complaints. In traditional Chinese medicine, Hoya carnosa and related species were used in poultices and preparations documented in Chinese pharmacopoeias, stretching back over 1,000 years. In Filipino folk medicine, Hoya leaves were used in treatments for fever, earache, and rheumatic pain, 3 entirely independent medical traditions, across 3 continents, independently arriving at similar therapeutic applications for the same plant family. That pattern of civilizational convergence is not coincidence. It is signal. Now here's the moment I want you to sit with. Imagine a caravan route in the ancient Levant. The year is somewhere around 850 BCE. A figure, a prophet, according to the text, exhausted past the point of function, has collapsed under a broom tree in the desert. He asks, in the words of the first book of Kings, chapter 19, to die. He is not being dramatic. He has been traveling for a day into the wilderness. He has had nothing to eat or drink. He lies down and sleeps in the desert heat. Then an angel touches him and tells him to arise and eat. The text says he looked, and there, at his head, was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate. He drank. He lay down again. The angel came a second time and said, arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you. And the text records that he arose and ate and drank, and went in the strength of that food for 40 days and 40 nights. That is not metaphor. That is a precise description of rehydration and caloric rescue, followed by metabolic recovery. Now, why is Hoya in this story? Because the Hoya's bloom produces something that the ancient world understood as medicinal, and that modern research is beginning to examine biochemically. The star-shaped flower clusters drip a sweet, intensely fragrant nectar. This nectar is rich in sugars and, in some Hoya species, in compounds with demonstrated antimicrobial properties. The volatile aromatic compounds released primarily benzyl alcohol, benzaldehyde, and methyl benzoate, depending on the variety, have been the subject of ongoing research into their physiological effects. Linalool, present in many Hoya fragrance profiles, appears in the same research literature being examined for anxiety-modulating effects as lavender. The Hoya's bloom is its rarest and most powerful offering, but it requires patience that most owners never maintain. Many Hoya varieties do not bloom until their 3rd or 4th year of indoor growth. They bloom from the same spurs, year after year, which means moving the plant, or cutting those spurs, prevents the fragrance ever arriving. The growers who understand this, who leave the plant undisturbed, resist the urge to repot, and wait, eventually find themselves sitting in a room that fills with honey-sweet fragrance every night without any synthetic product whatsoever. The prophet who rose from the desert floor and walked for 40 days on the strength of a single meal did not have metabolic science to explain what happened to him. He had the experience. The research is now beginning to ask why. If this kind of ancient knowledge resonates with you, the idea that the things growing on a windowsill have been treasured for reasons far deeper than we were taught, hit like and subscribe right now. Because what's coming in the next 6 entries goes even deeper into the intersection of fragrance, history, and what your body actually does when it smells something real. Number 6. Eucalyptus. Long before eucalyptus oil appeared in every cold and flu preparation sold in Western pharmacies, the Aboriginal peoples of Australia had developed sophisticated understandings of the therapeutic properties of the eucalyptus tree. Steam inhalation using eucalyptus leaves was a documented traditional practice for respiratory ailments, a form of what we would now call aromatherapy that appears independently in the medical traditions of multiple cultures who encountered eucalyptus during the colonial period. When Baron Ferdinand von Müller, the German-Australian botanist, first formally promoted eucalyptus oil to the European medical community in the 1850s, he was building on something the Aboriginal Australians had understood for generations. By the turn of the 20th century, eucalyptus oil was standard issue in field hospitals during the Boer War and World War I, used for both wound disinfection and respiratory treatment when pharmaceutical alternatives were unavailable. The primary aromatic compound, E8 cineole, also called eucalyptol, has become one of the more rigorously studied plant compounds in the aromatic medicine literature. It demonstrates measurable mucolytic properties, meaning it thins mucus in both laboratory models and human clinical studies. A 2016 systematic review in evidence-based complementary and alternative medicine examined the existing clinical trial literature and found results for eucalyptol's effects on respiratory function that researchers characterized as statistically significant in multiple trials, while also noting that larger-scale confirmatory studies remain warranted. The preparation nuance, worth knowing: eucalyptus leaves must be bruised or warmed to release their volatile compounds at useful concentrations. A bundle of fresh eucalyptus hung in a shower releases dramatically more 1.8 cineole than the same bundle sitting passively in a vase in a dry room. The combination of steam and heat volatilizes the aromatic compounds and drives them into the respiratory tract, which is exactly the mechanism traditional steam inhalation practices relied on, long before researchers had words like volatile compound or mucolytic. For indoor growing, look specifically for Eucalyptus gunnii, cider gum, or Eucalyptus cinerea. The silver dollar eucalyptus. Both are container manageable. Both produce the characteristic silvery blue juvenile foliage most people recognize. And both can be pruned regularly to keep them at windowsill scale, with those prunings being more aromatically potent per cutting than any commercially purchased bundle. Number 5. Gardenia. Gardenias appear in Chinese literature as early as the Tang Dynasty, 618–907 CE, where they were grown in palace gardens specifically for their fragrance and used in Buddhist temple offerings. The dried fruit of Gardenia jasminoides, called jizi in Chinese medicine, appears in the Ben Cao Gang Mu, the 16th century Chinese pharmacopoeia compiled by Li Shizhen, as a treatment for fever, inflammation, and jaundice. A fragrance plant with a documented pharmaceutical record spanning 1,500 years. In Japan, gardenias were cultivated for both their fragrance and their pigment. The fruit produces a yellow dye used in traditional Japanese cuisine, most notably in takuan, the yellow pickled daikon, and in textile dyeing. In the American South, gardenias became so embedded in the culture of porches, corsages, and summer evenings that the fragrance itself triggers a specific kind of memory in anyone who grew up near them. The primary aromatic compounds in gardenia flowers include linalool, benzyl acetate, and methyl jasminate compounds shared with jasmine and part of the same chemical family that has been most studied for sedative and anxiolytic effects in the aromatherapy literature. The intensity of gardenia fragrance is partly due to an unusually high concentration of aromatic volatiles released per unit area of petal surface, which is why a single bloom can fill a room. What experienced gardenia growers know that most beginners do not. Gardenias form their flower buds under cool nighttime temperatures, typically in the range of 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. This is why a gardenia that has spent a summer on a porch or in a cool greenhouse will bloom far more prolifically when it comes indoors than one that has been kept at uniform room temperature all year. The seasonal temperature swing is the trigger. Without it, the plant produces lush foliage and no flowers. This is the exact piece of information that separates the growers with blooming gardenias from the ones who gave up. Number 4. Hyacinth. Here is a piece of history that almost never appears in plant books. The word hyacinth comes from ancient Greek, and the hyacinth plant appears in Greek mythology in one of its most significant botanical stories, Hyacinthos. A beautiful youth was killed accidentally by a discus. Where his blood fell, a flower grew. Apollo, grieving, named the flower after him and inscribed it with the Greek letters of lamentation. This story is far older than its Greek telling. Archaeological and botanical historians have traced the origins of the hyacinth cult to ancient Sparta, where the Hyacinthia, a 3-day festival, was one of the most important religious observances of the Spartan calendar. The fragrant flower was at the center of a ritual that combined grief, remembrance, and regeneration. The same themes, scholars note, that appear repeatedly in ancient Near Eastern religious traditions surrounding fragrant plants. The hyacinth's aromatic profile, rich, densa, unmistakably spring-like, comes primarily from phenylethyl alcohol, also found in rose, eugenol, and hyacinthine. Phenylethyl alcohol is one of the compounds most studied in the fragrance and mood literature. A 2008 study in the Journal of Physiological Anthropology found associations between phenylethyl alcohol inhalation and reductions in self-reported stress and fatigue, with researchers characterizing the results as warranting continued investigation. The forcing technique chilling hyacinth bulbs for 10 to 12 weeks at 35 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit, then bringing them into warmth and light simulates the passage of a complete winter. The chill period is non-negotiable. Bulbs that have not been properly cold-treated produce short, malformed flower stalks with few florets and weak fragrance. The growers, who understand that the darkness and the cold are not deprivation but preparation, always get the bloom, start different bulbs at staggered 2-week intervals through the autumn. And you can have continuous, intensely fragrant hyacinth bloom from January through April, a living fragrance calendar that requires nothing more than timing, patience, and a refrigerator shelf. Number 3. Paperwhite narcissus. Narcissus, the entire genus, carries one of the most complex and paradoxical histories in the plant world. In ancient Greece, Narcissus was the flower of the underworld. Persephone was gathering narcissus flowers when Hades abducted her. The Elysian fields, the Greek afterlife, were described as filled with narcissus blooms. The Romans planted narcissus on graves. The scent was associated with sleep, transition, and the boundary between the living and the dead. And yet, in traditional Chinese medicine, narcissus flowers were used as a symbol of good fortune and purity, placed in homes during the Lunar New Year to welcome prosperity. In the Sufi poetry of the Islamic world, narcissus eyes, a common poetic metaphor, represented divine beauty and intoxicating spiritual presence. The same flower death in one civilization, divine beauty in another. Modern researchers examining the Narcissus genus discovered something that gives this paradox a biochemical dimension. Narcissus plants contain a compound called galantamine, an alkaloid that crosses the blood-brain barrier and inhibits the enzyme acetylcholinesterase. thereby increasing levels of acetylcholine in the brain. In 2001, galantamine was approved by the FDA as a treatment for Alzheimer's disease. It is extracted commercially from narcissus bulbs and related plants in the Amaryllidaceae family. The flower of the ancient dead is now a clinically approved neurological treatment. The fragrance of paper, white narcissus sweet. Strong. Unmistakably, narcissus is separate from the galantamine content, which is concentrated in the bulb rather than the bloom. But the story of that compound is a precise illustration of the principle running through every plant on this list. Ancient cultures observed effects and built traditions around them without being able to name the mechanism. Modern research is now naming the mechanisms and finding that the observations were not superstition. For succession blooming, set new bulbs in stones and water. The roots need oxygen, not soil every 2 weeks from October through January. Keep them cool and dark for root development. Then move them into bright light as shoots appear. The entire process from planting to bloom takes 4 to 6 weeks. A winter without continuous paper white fragrance is now simply a matter of planning. Number 2. Arabian jasmine. There is a passage in the Song of Solomon, one of the most ancient and celebrated love poems in the Hebrew Bible, that reads, "While the king was at his couch, my nard gave its fragrance. My beloved is to me a sachet of myrrh that lies between my breasts." The passage is cataloging aromatic plants in the context of the highest human experiences: intimacy, beauty, divine encounter. Jasmine is named explicitly in later biblical commentary and in the religious traditions that grew from the Hebrew scriptures. But its presence in the ancient world is documented far beyond any single text. In India, jasmine appears in Sanskrit texts under the name Malika, described in Ayurvedic literature as a plant for the mind and for the promotion of mental clarity. Chinese court records from the Song dynasty document jasmine used to scent tea, a practice that continues today and that produces one of the most widely consumed flavored teas in the world. In the Arab world, jasmine was cultivated extensively for perfumery, for religious use, and for the jasmine water attar of jasmine traded across the medieval Islamic world. Multiple civilizations, multiple independent traditions, all arriving at the same aromatic plant as something more than merely pleasant. The primary aromatic compounds in Arabian jasmine, Jasminum sambac, include benzyl acetate, linalool, benzyl alcohol, indole, and methyl yasmonate. That last compound, methyl yasmonate, has attracted significant scientific interest entirely separate from its fragrance properties. It functions in plant biology as a stress response signaling molecule, and researchers studying its effects in human cell models have published results that some scientists have characterized as noteworthy. Though the human clinical evidence remains in early stages and should be understood as preliminary, the fragrance of Arabian jasmine is released primarily in the evening, and at night the flowers open progressively after dark, and the aromatic compound production peaks in the hours before midnight. This nocturnal release mechanism evolved to attract night-pollinating moths. It means that a well-positioned Arabian jasmine plant rewards the people who are present in the evening, not the morning. It is a plant that perfumes a home on its own schedule, and the schedule happens to be precisely the hours when most people are home to experience it. Place it near a window that gets warm afternoon sun and faces an area where you spend your evenings. Keep the soil consistently moist. Jasmine does not tolerate drought, and maintain whatever humidity you can manage in a home environment. The flowers are small. The fragrance is enormous, and no laboratory anywhere on Earth has successfully synthesized the complete aromatic profile of a living jasmine bloom. Number 1. Lavender and its forgotten cousin. Wait, lavender already appeared at number 10. You might be thinking, it did. And here is why it appears again. Because what appears at number 1 is not the lavender most people know. It is Lavandula latifolia spike lavender, and the story of why the perfume and medicine trades treated it as an entirely different plant from common lavender is one of the most illuminating forgotten histories in the aromatic plant world. Spike lavender produces a fragrance that shares lavender's characteristic floral quality, but with a dramatically higher concentration of camphor and 1. 8. Cineole, the same compound that makes eucalyptus oil clinically interesting for respiratory function. This meant that spike lavender was used in medieval Europe for an entirely different set of purposes than common lavender, where lavandula angustifolia went into perfume and sleep sachets. Spike lavender went into liniments, wound treatments, and preparations for chest complaints. The distinction was so well understood that medieval apothecaries maintained separate stocks of both and priced them differently. The ancient Romans used spike lavender in their bath preparations, specifically because of its stimulating rather than sedating quality, the inverse of what common lavender delivers. Dioscorides described it in De Materia Medica under a distinct name, and the differentiation between the two species' therapeutic properties persisted in European medical literature for over 1,000 years. Here is the preparation detail that almost no homegrower knows. Spike lavender is not commonly sold at garden centers, where almost everything labeled lavender is lavandula angustifolia, or a hybrid. It must be specifically sought out from herb specialists or botanical nurseries. And when you find it, the aromatic experience is immediately distinctive, sharper, more camphoraceous, more medicinal, and in terms of pure fragrance intensity, more powerful per square inch of foliage than almost anything else on this list. The complete lavandula family, taken together, illustrates the principle that runs through every plant we have discussed today. What looks like a single plant category is often, on closer examination, a spectrum of distinct biochemical profiles that different civilizations learn to distinguish through careful observation across generations. The common lavender that ends up in a plastic sachet from a gift shop and the spike lavender that Roman physicians used for chest complaints are not the same plant for the same purposes. They are different tools from the same family, and the traditions that used both knew the difference. Which brings us to the principle that matters most. The principle that changes everything. A closing thought. Every plant we have covered today produces its aromatic compounds, the very molecules that ancient healers, perfumers, priests, and physicians valued in living tissue, in dynamic response to its environment, in concentrations and compound ratios that change with the season, the time of day, the age of the leaf, and the method of preparation. Dry the plant incorrectly, and you lose the volatile compounds within weeks. Heat it past a certain threshold, different for every plant, but always lower than boiling, and you destroy the most fragile of the aromatic molecules. Extract it with the wrong solvent, and you pull the wrong compounds. Grow it in insufficient light, and the plant produces fewer essential oil glands. Buy it already processed, already bottled, already dried to a shelf-stable powder, and you are receiving a shadow of what the living plant produces. The Roman soldiers who rubbed fresh mint on their arms before battle were not choosing an inferior product because they lacked a bottle of peppermint oil. They were using the superior form. The temple priests, who burned fresh rosemary branches in sacred spaces, were not making do with what was available. They were using the form of the plant that delivers the highest concentration of the compounds they were working with. This is the pattern that every civilization in this video understood, and that our modern supplement and fragrance industries have almost completely abandoned the living, whole, minimally processed plant is the thing itself. Everything else is a reduction. The question worth sitting with, the one I want you to take away from today's video, is this: what else have we simplified past the point of usefulness? And what would we find if we went back to the original form? That is the question the ancients were answering with everything they planted, dried, burned, brewed, and pressed. And it may be the question that matters most for the next generation of people who are tired of buying synthetic approximations of things that grow on a windowsill for free. If this video changed how you think about the plants in your home, or the plants that should be in your home, please hit like right now. It genuinely helps this content reach the people who are ready to hear it. Subscribe for more at the intersection of ancient wisdom, natural health, and the science that is finally catching up to what our ancestors already knew. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, a friend who is still buying air fresheners, a family member who has been told that the old ways have nothing to teach us. And leave a comment below. Which plant on this list surprised you most? Which one are you growing or planning to grow? I read every single comment, and your answers genuinely shape what we cover next. The plants are real. The history is real. The fragrance is real. The only question left is what you do with it. This video is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice. Consult a qualified healthcare professional before using any plant-based preparation for therapeutic purposes, particularly if you are pregnant, nursing, managing a chronic health condition, or taking prescription medications.